Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Monster in the Park, submitted by Cray Ray Ray. Okay, so this happened about 2 years ago. I'm an avid runner and always have to get my workout, no matter what time of day. I had a treadmill for a while, but it broke, and I didn't see any point in replacing it, as I'd really liked being outside more than anything. Didn't matter. Snow, cold, rain, hot, I would rather have run outside. I was doing 5K races every other week and also training for a half marathon before training for a full marathon when this went down. I usually ran in the morning, and usually in my neighborhood, but there were times that I would like to do trail running as it's a little bit easier on your body overall. There were a number of parks right near me, and I would frequently go hit those up as much as I could. On this particular day, I didn't get my morning run in and had to stay late at work, so by the time I got home it was starting to get dark. But I figured I had a few more minutes of daylight, and I could at least get a few miles in on a trail in a nearby park. So I drove out there after telling my boyfriend where I was going to be and start things off. It's a pretty big park. I lived in central New York, just to give you an idea of geography. There was still a little bit of light, like I said, so off I went to run a loop around the park, and obviously in areas that I was familiar with. I just wanted to make sure that there were other people out there, maybe walking their dogs and that kind of thing. It's a little reassuring when you see other people. Although it was strange when I got there. The parking lot that I usually parked in was empty, and for the first few miles of my run, I didn't see anyone. I had brought along my headlamp because I knew it would probably be getting dark before I would get back to my car. And about halfway through, I stopped to stretch for a minute, and then I put my headlamp on. I was kind of in an isolated gazebo, or whatever you call it, and I got this feeling that I was being watched. Despite the fact that it was getting darker, I wanted to get a couple of hills in, so I brushed everything off that I was feeling, did a couple of hill workouts, and then got back to the trail to head back to my car. By now it was dark, and actually probably illegal for me to even be in the park after dusk. What was I going to do? There I was. There were a series of bridges that I had to cross over to get back to my car. So I stopped, and I got that feeling again. There were bushes on either side of this first bridge, and I just got nervous. I felt like something was either in there or behind them staring at me. So I took a deep breath and set off of the first bridge. I felt like something was either in there or behind me staring at me. I took a deep breath, set off over the first bridge, and as I was running, my iPod died and I didn't feel like switching over to my phone. I did have an Apple Watch, but I rarely used it beyond my workouts because I found that a dedicated heart rate monitor was more effective than what you got with that. I stopped to take my earbuds out, and that's when I heard the pounding of feet off to my side. Pounding on grass, but loud enough for me to hear. I looked over, but in the growing dark, I didn't see anything. When I did look over, the pounding stopped. So I took another deep breath and figured I really better get moving out of here because something was wrong. And at that point in time, I felt it for a fact. I mean, for all I know, maybe there was a rapist chasing me down, but only when I started running again did I hear the pounding. I mean, again, really heavy footsteps, something that you couldn't ignore. Every time I would stop and look around, I saw nothing and the footsteps would stop. I got over the second bridge and started running faster. I needed to get over another bridge that also led to a street that I could cut over to get to the parking lot rather than follow the trail back to the actual parking lot. At this point, I wanted to be under streetlights for my own safety and near houses if I needed help. I sprinted my ass off and got to the last bridge, and at this point my heart was beating so hard I couldn't even hear the footsteps. But for some reason, I knew whatever it was still behind me. Once in a while, we do get bears and that sort of thing up in my area, but it's super rare. Usually they're just black bears from the southern part of New York. They kind of just wander up for whatever reason. But they're not something that happens in my neck of the woods all the time. So I got to the bridge and made my way over, and that's when I heard the footsteps stop. But on the bridge itself, they actually made the bridge shake as they were pounding on it. I turned around and saw a gigantic, hairy creature that was certainly not a bear. It was upright and hitting the rail of the bridge with its hand, and also hitting its feet on the wooden planks. I was frozen in fear staring at this thing. Then it made one loud whooping noise and stopped banging on the bridge, but it kept its gaze on me. And for whatever reason, it wasn't coming over towards me, and I think it's because of the streetlights behind me now, but how do I know the motives of whatever this thing was? It finally turned around and just faded off into the darkness. And that's when it dawned on me that this could have been a Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it. It was that big. I mean, it must have been at least 10 feet tall and was covered in hair. I didn't see its full size or anything like that. And some of the other stories here, people say they see red eyes or yellow eyes. I didn't see any of that. I just knew it was huge and it was strong. I finally took my phone out to try to take a picture, but by this time it was way too late. My senses kicked in and I just ran down the street to get back to my car. And I did, and called my boyfriend, completely out of breath, and was just rambling on about what had just happened. He told me to calm down and to just get home, and that's really what I did. And I spoke to him all the way back, afraid that even though it didn't cross the bridge, that maybe this thing still might try to pick up my car or something. I know it sounds silly, but I was that scared. Over the next couple of weeks, I asked a lot of my running friends and people who frequented the park if they had ever heard or seen anything like it, and no one had. I mean, it's hard to imagine that something that big could wander around with no one ever really seeing it, but I know what I saw, and I know it was chasing me around. I only go back to that park during the day now, and I try not to run at night at all. But every time I do go there, whether it's for a picnic or just to play disc golf or for a run, I'm always highly aware of my surroundings. Kind of in a weird way, I still look for it, but I know I will probably never see it again. What the hell was that? Submitted by Richie T. When I was a kid back around 1996, maybe 13, I'd been up the street visiting one of my friends, and we were planning on me staying over, but my mom said no because we had church the next morning. She wanted me home for that. So I stayed out till a little past 11, and I was just going to ride my bike home, which only was a couple of blocks. This was in late spring, if I remember correctly. So I got on my bike and just started pedaling down the pretty quiet streets of my neighborhood. As I was going, I was thinking about how mad I was at my mom for not letting me stay over at my friend's house. But after a block, I heard what sounded like a plane making a whooshing noise above me. I mean, it wasn't exactly the sound of a plane, but it just sounded like something was above me. I want to point out right now that this happened in Texas, and that will have some relevance in a few minutes. I kept riding, and eventually looked up to see a very dark, large, winged animal above me. It was following along with me and making the noise that I'd been hearing. So I just started to haul my behind back to my house, all the while with this thing kind of going higher and lower, but always right above me. When I got home, I went right into my garage as the door had been left open. My dad worked second shift and would be home in a little while, which is probably why my mom left the door open. And I heard whatever this thing was set itself on the roof of my garage, and I was terrified to try to run to my back door. I stayed there for like another half hour, and then knew that my mom would kill me if she knew that I hadn't come home on time, when she had asked me to. Everything had been really quiet, so I decided to take a chance and run into my house. I did, and my mom was awake in the living room watching the news and was mad that I had not come home right away when she had asked me to. I told her what I had seen, and she told me that I was just making that up and I needed to just go to bed. Right then, my dad came in with a very strange look on his face. My mom asked him how everything was, and he just kind of mumbled, "Fine." And then he saw me and said, "Son, you need to go to bed." I said, "Okay." I apologized to my mom again and told my dad what I had seen, and he just looked at my mom. He then nodded, telling me to go upstairs. My bedroom was at the back of the house and looked out onto our yard and garage. So I went to the window and looked at the roof of the garage, but there was nothing there. I started to think maybe it was all part of my imagination, but then I overheard my dad talking to my mom. Now, eavesdropping on them was probably a bad idea, but I crept over to the stairs and listened to their conversation as they talked in low voices. My dad was telling my mom that he had seen a very large bird or something on the roof of our garage. Not like an eagle, he said, like something at least 10 feet tall with gigantic wings. Again, in the dark, he couldn't make out any of its features as he was telling my mom all this, but he said there was something really big out there, and he was thinking about calling the cops. But when he got to our house and turned around, the thing had gone, who knows where. So back to the Texas angle. I had heard about thunderbirds when I was a kid, and there were always these reports in the Midwest and the Southwest of these giant birds swooping down and trying to pick up kids. This thing, though, didn't look exactly like a bird. It kind of looked like a man with giant wings, but again, it was dark and I was scared. I just thanked my lucky stars that I got into the house and without any trouble. Because whatever that was, Thunderbird, Mothman, or whatever, it could have just picked me right up and pulled me into the air. Goodness knows what would have happened to me after that. I didn't bring it up the next day, and it took me until I was in my 20s to ask my dad about it again. He confirmed that he did see what I saw, but he didn't want to scare my mother outside of telling her that there was just a giant bird outside. We both kind of looked at each other over dinner. My mom was looking at us both. We told her how big it actually was. I still don't know what that thing was, and I guess it doesn't really matter. It never came back. I've never heard anyone else speak about it in my group of friends and family. But the fact that my dad saw what I saw makes me know that it was for real. Thing at El Capitan, submitted by Jonas. I grew up in a little nowhere town in Texas called Van Horn. As a teenager, there wasn't a ton of stuff to do outside of football and school, so my friends and I found ourselves driving around a lot in my friend's beat-up old pickup truck. I'm sure this is a familiar thing with a lot of people. Just driving around for the heck of it. One evening, that's what we were doing. It was me, Pete, and John. It was Pete's truck, and even though it was a piece of crap, it was the only wheels the three of us had. I didn't even have my license yet. I had just turned 16. Like I said, we would just drive around, and this night we decided to go up north to this place called the El Capitan Lookout, which is kind of like a rest area, but it is kind of cool because you can see El Capitan in the distance. You can just park and look at the mountain. Yeah, I know, really exciting, huh? So we took off up 54 and made our way to the other highway that takes you to the lookout. We got up there and got out and were just hanging out as the sun was lowering in the sky, just talking about girls and all that stuff guys talk about in their teenage years. It was a regular cab and just had a bench seat in the front, so we all squashed in and made our way home. But not so fast. As we were turning around, I remarked that it was kind of nice being up here when no one else was around, and I've been there during the day, and tourists can be a complete pain in the ass. And I don't mean that I don't want anybody to ever see El Capitan, but sometimes these people are just loud and obnoxious. I was a pretty quiet guy. So as Pete hits the ignition, John says, "Hey, look over there. What is that?" We followed his arm to the edge of the lot where he was pointing, and it looked like there was a man standing off behind one of the buildings. Again, this is kind of a rest stop for the main highway, so it's not unusual to see other people just pulling over. I said, "Oh, I guess there's another tourist here," and we watched the figure kind of walk away from the rest stop into the brush. No one said anything, and Pete turned around and started heading back on 62 to get back to 54. And we were driving along when John looked out his window and said, "Oh my God, look!" There seemed to be the same figure we had seen back there, now running alongside our truck. Again, it was dark, but we could clearly see a large human figure running alongside us, keeping up at our speed, which was at least 75. I know it's not humanly possible. It's nothing that runs that fast, except a cheetah. And this was not a cheetah. This was something running on 2 legs. Pete started to slow down, and I said, "What are you doing?" So he sped up. And we looked over, and the thing was no longer there. I was kind of relieved because this was getting really weird. Then Pete started to say, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." And I asked him what, and he said that in his rearview mirror, he could see the same thing on the road behind us. There was no other traffic out that night, and there was a bit of a moon, so when I turned around, I saw it too. It looked like a man, but kind of like an animal. I don't know how to fully describe it. Kind of a tall, leggy human with long hair, but the face was different. In the darkness, it kind of looked like a deer. I was craning my neck to see what was going on, and eventually this thing caught up to the back of the pickup truck and grabbed the tailgate. Then I think it put its legs on the back bumper because it seemed to get taller, and we all got a better look at it. It was a haggard-looking deer-like thing with a human body. I screamed like a little girl, and John did too. Pete floored it in an attempt to get it off the truck, but nothing worked. Then he began swerving across the lanes of the highway trying to shake it off. After about another mile, this thing must have been bored or something because it finally let go of the truck and just stood in the road as we drove away. Pete then really got going, and the entire truck was shaking. I kind of mentioned it was a piece of crap. We were all completely freaked out by what had just happened and kept talking over and over all the way home about what that thing could have been. I had no idea. No one else did either. We got home and decided not to tell anyone what we had seen, as we knew everyone would think we were crazy. Years later, I'd be listening to YouTube channels like yours and hear stories about things like this, and I'm not sure if it could have been a skinwalker, but it was some kind of twisted human-like animal. I live outside of Dallas now, where there are for sure no creatures like what I saw way back when. Werewolves, submitted by Chance45. I lived on a farm where there was only one other house near ours, maybe a quarter of a mile away. My best friend Chris lived there with his family, and other than that it was just our crops, barns, and all that kind of thing. It was a good 2 miles in either direction for another road crossing or a house. While we've mostly focused on vegetables, we also had chickens, ducks, and geese. We had a couple of barns as well as a larger facility to store the heavy equipment like our big tractors and that kind of thing. One night I was home alone. My parents and 2 sisters had gone into town. I was 12 at the time and was just going to watch HBO or whatever for the evening. I remember I was watching a movie and then got up to get something from the kitchen, and I looked out our back window, and in front of our barn, there was something standing there. We had lights all over our barns for security purposes. Even our chicken coop was locked, but they were free to come and go through a door on the side. For the most part, they just slept at night, but through the glass I could hear some kind of commotion happening out there. The shape was right behind the chicken coop, between it and our big barn. But a few seconds later, another shape came running out, and they both took off across our yard into the cornfields. They were going towards my friend Chris's house. They looked like really big dogs. That's the best way I could describe them. But there was something odd about the way they were running. I ran to our kitchen phone and called Chris and told him to look out his window in the back. He kept asking why, and I said, "Hey, just go look, just go look." He did while he was still on the phone, and then finally said back to me, "What the hell is that?" I asked him what he saw, and it was the same 2 things that had torn through his backyard and my yard, and then they both disappeared into the field next to his house. We talked about it for a while, and I said there's no way that they could be wolves. I mean, we lived in the middle of Iowa. There's no wolves out here. He thought maybe coyotes, but coyotes don't get that big. I know that for a fact, as I did hunt and still do, and I've been on coyote hunts. I mean, these things were much bigger. I locked all the doors and turned on all the lights on outside just to feel safer. Like that really did anything other than make me feel safer. When my parents got home, I told my dad what I had seen, and he had asked if I had gone outside, and I said no. He went out to check on things and found 2 of our chickens had been basically ripped apart. My dad grilled me for a while, asking if I had seen coyotes or even humans that could have done what happened to the chickens. But I told him over and over they looked like big dogs. He shook his head. He didn't know what to say. But he did make me go out and clean up the carcasses. Of course I was scared, but I also wanted to make my dad happy, even though he didn't believe what I had told him I'd seen. I even told him that Chris had seen the 2, and that prompted a phone call to Chris's dad. Chris's dad said the same thing as my dad, that we had all just been seeing things, and both our dads started laughing. I went to bed and nothing happened for another couple of weeks. But my dad started to notice that every once in a while a chicken or a duck would turn up missing, or in some cases ripped apart in their pen. He couldn't figure it out, kept blaming coyotes, but I could tell he was starting to think about what I told him. I mean, again, that's just what I thought. One night our family was playing board games in the dining room, and one of my sisters went out to the kitchen and then yelled out to us. She said there was something out by the chicken coop, and my dad jumped up to look, and I followed right behind him. And there it was, the same thing that I had seen and told my dad about. And then suddenly, the second one appeared, and they both started running in the same direction they had run before, on all 4s. I said to my dad, "See, I wasn't making it up." He didn't say anything, and immediately called Chris's dad. As scared as I was, at least my dad had seen what I had seen, and now he kind of believed me. About a week later, my mom and sisters went to visit my aunt for a weekend, and my dad and I and our farmhands were just going to run things while they were gone. We had worked a long day and had something to eat, and we were just going to relax for a few minutes, knowing that we had to get up again pretty early. I mean, that's farm life for you. So my dad was having a beer, and I kept pestering him for one, and he said, "Okay, but don't tell your mother." I know, not terribly responsible to let a 12-year-old have a beer, but we had busted our humps that day, and my dad was a very responsible guy for the most part when it came to things like this. So I went out to the kitchen to get him a beer and me, and lo and behold, when I looked out the window, those things were out in our yard again. I didn't yell. I backed up and told my dad in a whisper, "They're out there." He quickly got up, went down to our basement, and got one of his shotguns. He quietly loaded it, and we both crept over to the back door, to the yard that went into our kitchen. As silently as he could, he opened it, and then fired off a shot over the heads of these 2 things. That's when we got shocked. Both of these things stood up on their hind legs, and I could tell why I thought they were running kind of a weird way. Their legs didn't look like dog legs. They looked like human legs. And when they stood up, they kind of stood up like humans do, not like a dog with its paws forward. Their front legs or whatever were on their sides, and they were balanced perfectly. One of them started to rush towards us, and I could tell that it looked like a man, but it had a dog's head. My dad fired another shot before it got much closer, and that's when they both ran off in the same direction they always did, again on all 4s. My dad called the police and also Chris's dad, and when the sheriffs got to our house, we told them the story, and of course they didn't believe us. But we pointed out that we also lived so far out of town, why would anyone dress up to scare 2 houses repeatedly and kill their chickens and ducks? I remember my dad getting really PO'd at them, and when they left, he muttered under his breath and then called Chris's dad back. Chris's dad and Chris had seen the things that we had seen that night running through their yard, just like they always had. I don't know if what my dad did scared them off, but we never saw them again, and we never lost any more chickens or ducks. I like to think that I'm a pretty sane person, as well as my dad, and I didn't want to jump to any conclusions, like, oh my gosh, we saw werewolves. But that's exactly what they looked like. Years later, I saw a movie called Dog Soldiers, and again, that's exactly what they looked like. We no longer own the farm. My parents are retired, and none of us kids wanted it. I still live in Iowa, and every once in a while I'll drive out to our old place and talk to the people who now run the farm. They've never seen or experienced anything like what we had, and I'm very happy for them. It was a very scary time when those things were happening, and to see your dad firing off a shotgun at something that is otherworldly sticks with you, and will always stick with me. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you would like to hear narrated on this channel, email unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel, leave a comment, and I will get back to you as fast as I can. And of course, follow me on social media. All the links to that are in the description below. I also want to give a shout out to Steve Hudgens. He is an award-winning writer and filmmaker who writes his own stories and narrates them. So a little bit different from a dummy like me who relies on everybody else to write the content that I can narrate for you. It's a really cool channel. He's just getting started here, and I want you to go and check him out. maniacontheloose.com. There are links to everything that he does on YouTube, podcast, Rumble, whatever it is that you like to get your scary content from. So again, a little bit different from what I do, but go check him out. maniacontheloose.com. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, remember, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.
Anthem, see, red. There is nothing.